Good Shabbos again, everyone. My friends, 2 days ago was the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference. And what was that conference? It was 80 years ago, on January 20th, 1942, when 15 high-ranking German government officials gathered at a villa in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee to discuss and coordinate the implementation of what they called the final solution of the Jewish question. The aim of the conference was clear. It was to coordinate the physical destruction of as many Jews in Europe as possible. It was the most anti-Semitic conference in the history of the world. And unfortunately, as we all know, 80 years later, anti-Semitism is still a threat. In October, someone tried to burn down Congregation Beth Israel in Austin. Anti-Semitic flyers related to the pandemic have been found throughout the country in places as close as Austin and Missouri City. Flyers that say that we as Jews invented the vaccines to euthanize the world, that we as Jews are actually not getting the vaccine. It's funny because I think we Jews were the first to line up to get the vaccine. And of course, the hostage taking at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville this past Shabbat should concern all of us. There are real, genuine cases of anti-Semitism that deserve our attention. They should concern all of us. But I have another concern when it comes to anti-Semitism today. How this world in 2022, and the anti-Semitism we see throughout the United States and even here in Texas, affects our children. And whether they are young children or teenagers or going off to college, I'm concerned. I grew up in another small town north of Dallas, Richardson. And at the time, in the 70s and 80s, it had a very small Jewish community. And like Colleyville, I was surrounded by many non-Jews. In fact, this Jewish community in my small town north of Dallas was so small, my synagogue didn't have the funds or the ability to have our own building. We would have our services in a Lutheran church. And I can't tell you how kind and welcoming those church members were. They would do whatever they could to make us feel welcome, bending over backwards to allow us to do services and programs in religious school. I'll never forget, as a child, I'd come to services on Friday nights and Saturday morning. There would be a big curtain on the bima, and we would sneak behind the curtain, and there we would see a large cross. We were welcomed in that church, and the church would do what they could. They'd even cover up their crosses, do whatever they could to provide for that small Jewish community that my family was a part of. And that had an effect on me. I saw that my non-Jewish neighbors respected my faith. There was never a time as a young Jew that I was worried or scared. In fact, I often felt it was cool to be Jewish. Look how kind and respectful and welcoming my non-Jewish friends and neighbors are. The world has changed in many ways since I was a child. Our young people today see a different world, but they don't see a world the way which people my age see the world. They see the world differently because of social media and their cell phones. And our young people, like many of us, no matter our age, are constantly bombarded by anti-Semitic messages, and all the more so our young. I can't tell you how many times my 3 teenage children have come to me and said, "Dad, why is Israel so hated?" And I asked them, "Why do you say that?" Because they're constantly bombarded with messages on Instagram and Snapchat where they see anti-Israel messages constantly on their feeds. Our children are growing up in a world where they are constantly bombarded by the extremes. They see the extreme left that says we as American Jews are part of white privilege. and that Israel is a colonizer state, constantly persecuting the Palestinians. And they're also bombarded by messages on the extreme right that says that we as Jews control the world. Crazy theories that say that we as Jews control business and entertainment, industry and media. They see the extremes. And I feel that those extremes that they see, and then they're bombarded with what happened this past Shabbat, I'm concerned. Because I don't think the world is as anti-Semitic as these messages make it seem like it is. I still believe, and maybe I'm naive, but I still believe that there's a lot more respect and appreciation for us as Jews. No matter what the extremes may say, I still believe an overwhelming majority of Americans love us, respect us, or quite honestly, just don't think that much about us. Whether it's in a small town in North Texas or here in Houston or anywhere in the United States, even with the current rise in anti-Semitism, I still believe we are very safe as American Jews. At the beginning of our Torah portion this morning, the great Yitro, a non-Jew, a priest of another nation, appears all of a sudden in our Torah portion. He's a trusted and close friend of Moses and of the people, and he counsels and advises Moses. The Torah portion is named after him, one of the most important Torah portions in the entire year in which we read the Ten Commandments, named for a non-Jew. And his appearance comes immediately after the end of last week's Torah portion, the appearance of Amalek. Amalek was the complete opposite of Yitro. He led a non-Jewish nation that sought to destroy us, an evil people who attacked our most weakest. And the rabbis always say there's a reason why the Torah is written the way it is. Like the commentary Ibn Ezra reminds us, the Torah records a great friend of the Jewish people, Yitro, right after a great enemy of the Jewish people, Amalek, to assure us that not all non-Jews are wicked enemies of Israel. In fact, although there are Amaleks, there are many more Yitros, many more people who loved us then, who've always loved us, and continue to love us now. That's always been the case, and I still think it is the case. And believe it or not, today not only are we well liked, we may be more popular than any religious group. Recently, the Pew Research Center released another wide-ranging survey about the state of religion in America. And they discovered something amazing again. They've been doing this survey every few years since 2014. And if you didn't hear what they said, I promise I'm not making this up. They found that we as Jews are the most warmly regarded religious group in America. Respondents ranked various religious groups on what they titled a feeling thermometer. And Jews were ranked higher than any other religious group in the United States. The authors of the survey noted that warm feelings towards Jews even rose despite the contentious times we live in. And it's not just the Pew survey. Countless surveys continue to show that Americans of all walks of life value our culture of family values, our integration of ritual, and our sense of upward mobility despite earlier discrimination. We see in the old days, Jewish priorities and lifestyles stood outside the mainstream. But in today's education-based economy, we're often respected, even admired. Because the reality is, the truth is, after centuries of being outcasts, we continue to be invited in. And not just welcomed, but embraced by an overwhelming majority of Americans, perhaps with more regard than any other religious group in the United States. The reality is, we're still more popular and well-respected by our non-Jewish neighbors than at any point in Jewish history. Do our children know? Yes, we need strong enforcement of our hate crime laws. We should require our institutions, our schools, our synagogues to have robust security. We must have careful monitoring of anti-Semitism in all its forms. Yes, there are dangers out there. But the good news is we can fight that anti-Semitism with the extremes of the nutcases out there. We can fight them with millions of non-Jewish neighbors and friends who want to join us in that fight. From both sides of the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans, from all areas of the country, and from all different sectors of our society. For our children's sake, to ensure their desire to play an active role in our Jewish future, let's continue to emphasize to them, let's remind them, because they need the constant reminder. Let's remind them just how good we really do have it in this great country that we call home. I don't ever want any Jewish children, not one Jewish child, to give up on their Judaism because they're worried that we are hated. Then we lose. We let the anti-Semites win. They need that reinforcement from their parents and their grandparents, from their rabbis and teachers, from their synagogues and Jewish camps and Jewish day schools. That yes, there are anti-Semites out there, but it is still very safe to be a Jew. We can't afford to lose any of our children. And I don't ever want our children to define their Judaism by those who hate us. Because those who do hate us on the extremes will try to define us by their own perverse views of what we as Jews stand for. They don't define us. We define us. We define ourselves by the values that we as a Jewish people have always stood with, that have guided us through centuries in different cultures that have transcended generations. We define who Jews are. We define what the Israel state stands for. We define the good work that we as Jews are trying to do for this world as we have always done. Our children need to see us fighting for our definitions of what it really means to be an American Jew. Our children need to join us in that fight. We want them to join us. We want them to be proud Jews, defining themselves of what that means as an American Jew in 2022. Yes, as traumatic as this past Shabbat was, in some respects, Saturday evening was a good reminder that we are still safe. Think about it for just a moment. We live in a country where over 150 FBI agents flew out on a Saturday night to help rescue 4 Jewish hostages in a small town Texas synagogue, where millions across the country expressed their genuine prayers and concerns. Perhaps you've heard from some of them. I had clergy members of other faiths reach out to me all week. Now they all want to take me out for a nice lunch. I don't think our ancestors could have ever imagined just how good we really do have it. I was reminded that despite 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, we are still here, we are still growing, and we are still protected by many who love us. Love us for who we are. Shabbat shalom, everyone.